Well, hey, everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to today's Eagles on the Beat segment this Tuesday. Hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. Hope you've unpacked, cleared your mind from a really busy NFL draft. And today we're going to be joined by Senior Bowl Executive Director Jim Nagy. Jim, a former NFL scout with the Seattle Seahawks, the Green Bay Packers, the New England Patriots. I'm really eager to get Jim's take on how this draft went down with the Georgia players and maybe some of the other SEC stars that went earlier in the draft. Also, I might try and see if I can get a little intel out of Jim on next year's Senior Bowl class. Selfishly, I love going to the Senior Bowl. I think it was one of the best kept secrets. Now everybody knows about it. I think understands what's going on down there. Every January in Mobile, it's an opportunity to watch the best players in the country go toe-to-toe, one-on-one, no holds barred, with their futures on the line. The practices are as exciting, if not more exciting in some ways, than the games. And it's a who's who. You look down on the sidelines, it's not just the players on the field. You're seeing virtually every NFL coach and GM on the sideline, watching them do their businesses. They study players that they're on the verge of investing millions and millions of dollars in. So the Senior Bowl, always something near and dear to my heart. I'm a Mobile native. I was able to work down there for years and covered several Senior Bowls when Tennessee put a lot of guys in it. Alabama put a lot of guys in it. And I think Georgia could be on the verge of a very big Senior Bowl draft class. But again, that'll be a question for Jim Nagy. We're going to talk more today about Jake Fromm's draft stock. Seems like there's some revisionist history going on now. A lot of people grabbing at the low-hanging fruit, telling us that the Georgia offense wasn't really that good, telling us that Kirby Smart had it all wrong and that Jake really wasn't as good as that 36-7 record and 3 straight SEC East Division titles might indicate. I'd like to remind them that Georgia was 12-0 last season when DeAndre Swift was healthy and the offense didn't turn the ball over more than 3 times. I think that's a pretty good percentage. You turn the ball over 4 times and miss 2 field goals, you're probably going to lose to darn near any SEC team. That's what happened against South Carolina. When they played LSU, they were missing Swift. They were missing Lawrence Cager. George Pickens wasn't on the field, their other top receiver. They lost Dominic Blaylock in the first quarter. They lost Kearis Jackson. They were down 4 receivers against maybe the most prolific SEC offense of all time. So don't tell me that Kirby Smart doesn't know how to game plan and that the Georgia offense is suddenly not well planned. With that, let me go ahead and bring on Jim Nagy right now, my producer, Michael Carbell. He's in Atlanta producing today's Eagles on the Beat segment. Really appreciate the job that Eagles does for us. And now I hope Jim's with us. Jim, you're sponsored by Reese's. Obviously, they have been a fantastic sponsor for the Senior Bowl. So I'm hoping you can give us some pieces of information today. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, you do a great job. You're a go-to guy for me. I remember how impressed I was at the Senior Bowl, not this past year, but the year before, when I asked you about DeAndre Walker. He wasn't even there. And instead of saying, well, he's not here, let's talk about the guys that are, you said, you know what? This is a guy I really like. And you went on to tell his story. And I guess I'll start with that. When I say Senior Bowl Executive Director, a lot of people go, well, what does that mean? So I'll let you tell people exactly what it is you do right now.
I've been here 2 years, like you talked about earlier. I was 18 years in the NFL. And, my role, I've got 2 separate roles, I feel like. One, I'm a steward of the city of Mobile. I'm really trying to do everything I can to grow this game and grow out our week and make it more of a destination for people. You talked about the virtues of our game earlier. You did a great job setting that up. I appreciate it. But then I also feel like I'm a steward to the 32 NFL teams. So we've got a scouting department just like they do, hired all former NFL scouts that come in. We've got guys on the road at every game in the fall. Some weekends we're at 10, 12 games every Saturday. So we're doing this thing just like NFL teams are. We've already evaluated every FBS player in the country for next year's game. I have a ton of catch up to do myself. I haven't seen any of them, but our board's taking shape. We've got under 400 names for next year, and it's a year-round cycle. We're trying to, we never did it this way before. I've tried to pull back the curtain for the fans to kind of show the fans our process and who we're interested in. But we're doing everything they're doing. We're watching tape. We're going to games. We're calling around to schools. So we're doing it the best way we can on the budget that we have.
Well, you do a great job with it, Jim. I can attest to that. I was down there a couple years ago. Really enjoyed the experience, the access, and the knowledge that I learned from not just you, but a lot of the players. The access is incredible, and the players have a different story to tell when they're not under that program's roof anymore. So let's
right.
talk about this last draft. It started out with Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa going number 5 and Burrow going number 1. Let's just start with your thoughts on those two very prominent SEC quarterbacks.
Yeah, Joe was really a no-brainer for Cincinnati. He was a clean prospect. We call those guys clean prospects. Obviously the tape was the tape. 60 touchdowns in the SEC is incredible. I was kind of waiting for a clunker game in there at some point during the season. He never gave us one. I saw him play twice live against LSU and Alabama. Our staff saw him play 5 times. So we knew Joe pretty well. I met him last summer down at the Manning camp. And I was just texting with his dad the other day after the draft. I congratulated his dad, Jimmy Burrow, and he just said, Jim, he's like, I can remember last summer when Joe met you. He was so excited to play in the Senior Bowl, and the fact that he played himself into being the unquestioned number 1 pick, pretty incredible. And then off the field, he's a total stud. He's exactly what you're looking for as a franchise quarterback. He's going to walk into Cincinnati and have credibility in that locker room based off everything he did. He gets along with all different kinds of people. He can connect with different kinds of people. All you have to do is go out to pregame and watch that kid walk around a field, and you can see, what kind of he is for that football team. So I have no issue, no doubt that he's going to step into Cincinnati, and those vets are going to jump on board with him. And then Tua, the thing is the injury deal, and he's a really good player. I think he'll be a really good starter at the next level if he can stay healthy, but that's a roll of the dice. It's a roll of the dice. The Dolphins obviously felt like it was worth taking. So now hopefully he can stay healthy and be a good player for them, because he's done a ton of great things in college football and at Alabama, but he's got to stay healthy.
Yeah, no doubt about it. A sensational athlete, Jim. The way he extends plays, I just don't know how that works in the NFL. Everybody's a little bigger, faster, stronger, hits you harder. So I saw the Dolphins were very aggressive building the offensive line. They had a Georgia player. We'll get to Solomon in a minute. Let me go with Andrew Thomas, the number 4 overall pick to the New York Giants. All we heard was he was 3, he was 4. You know the poker game better than anyone. Those NFL teams aren't going to tell you who they've got their eye on. What are your thoughts about Andrew Thomas at number 4 to the New York Giants?
It makes sense. To me, it makes sense for Dave Gettleman making that pick. To me, Andrew was the safest guy of those 4, and then none of them had any serious reservations. They were just all different. But Andrew, if you're really buying into Andrew, you're buying into what the people at Georgia say about him. And we've got to get one of our scouting assistants was in the Georgia program last year. And he's so highly regarded, and at a position like the offensive line that's so intangibles based, the kid's going to hit his ceiling. You could argue that Mekhi Becton at Louisville had a higher ceiling because of his athleticism and size, and even Tristan Wirfs athletically. I mean, he's head and shoulders above all those guys. He vertical jumped 36 inches and was a 10-something broad jump. So he's the all-time combine record. So you can't argue that he's a better athlete than those guys. They went with more than a known commodity. And again, that's not a bad move. Andrew's going to be a good player. He's big. He's long. Comes on the ball in the run game and moves people. He's got a ways to go in pass protection. That wasn't always clean, but that was a good pick for those guys. He's going to play for those guys for a long time.
Yeah, he's a consummate pro. I can tell you that, and I can attest to the character, Jim. I mean, he's a very impressive young man. Every interview is yes, sir, no, sir, turns and looks at the guy he's talking to. I know that doesn't win football games, but you dig a little deeper and you get to know the guy and you find out about the character and what he's really made of. He's the guy that I see being in the NFL a long, long time. Now, the other one, now Isaiah Wilson, and you can't coach 6'7", 350, and you know as well as I do that Isaiah, you said that Andrew's got some work to do. Isaiah's got a lot of work to do, but what about making that pick, a guy with that kind of upside? You've been in those rooms with teams that have seen that sort of size and athleticism. How much of a gamble is it to take Isaiah Wilson in the first round?
Well, I think he went a little bit before where most teams were comfortable with him, but all it takes is one team to really, buy into a player. And obviously Tennessee did. I worked with John Robinson for a long time in New England. Mike Vrabel was a player of ours there. And then when I went to Kansas City, we traded for Mike. So I've been around those guys. They value toughness. They must have had something coming out of the interviews and spending time with Isaiah that they really liked, and they've got a hole there. They've had good offensive line play for a long time. They've had Conklin and Taylor Lewan as their tackles, So they've had good guys out on the edges, and so they know what it looks like. So hopefully, Isaiah can put it all together. And if he does, they're going to have a really, really good player.
So the draft moment, I got to ask you, Jim, there's a lighter side to this. Isaiah's in the living room. The girlfriend's on the lap. The mom comes in. What do you think about? Did you like that in the living room coverage that we saw this year, or did the prototypical NFL guy and you just shake your head and say, too many cameras and too many living rooms this year?
No, I really liked it, Mike. I like the stripped down version. I like that more. That it gave more of a human element to me. I like seeing that. I like seeing the kids with the GMs and the decision makers, and I like being in the homes of the players. I'm not a big fan of the red carpet stuff before. Like when they started doing that 10 years ago, I worked for a guy in the league, and I remember when they first started doing that, he muted the TV and addressed the whole draft room. And he said, guys, we complain about some of these guys becoming prima donnas at our level. Well, look what we're doing. Like, we're creating this. Like, they come into the NFL on a red carpet. So I kind of like the fact that we stripped it down and went the way we did it this year. It'll be interesting to see if they continue with kind of that virtual format.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And this year's draft coverage, by the way, broke the records. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic had a little bit to do with that. There was a captive audience, but I wonder now, just like you, what type of coverage we'll see in the future. I think we're all learning how to do our jobs a little differently, maybe more efficiently in some ways. So one pick that I didn't think was efficient, and you'll probably argue with me on this, and I may be biased, but I'll tell you what, DeAndre Swift to me, when I think of franchise back, he seems to have the ceiling. Now, Jim, I know that he had the injury. I've got to wonder a little bit if durability played a role in this, because DeAndre Swift was a guy, everybody in the stadium knew that number 7 had to carry Georgia every single week. Whereas I felt Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who is a tough, durable, and versatile runner, just like DeAndre, but I felt like with all those other weapons around, he really benefited from the spread field versus DeAndre, who had to get some amazing results with everybody keyed on him. So I was a little surprised that the Dolphins passed. I'm guessing they probably thought they could get him early in the second round, and even more surprised that the Chiefs passed, because I thought he was a perfect fit in Kansas City. So with that, you're the expert. I know you did draft grades on both Clyde Edwards-Helaire and DeAndre. What were your thoughts about the way that shook out?
I had Edwards-Helaire as my top running back. I thought that would have been my guy. That would have been my pick. But that's taking nothing away from DeAndre. But you nailed it. I mean, what we don't have any of the medical stuff. We don't know how these guys interviewed and the mental side of it. So we don't really know everything that goes into these decisions. I'll even go back to a couple years ago when I was in Seattle. We actually failed Sony Michel on his medical. We didn't fail him, but we knocked him way down our board, and we were fine with Chubb's. So it's you just never know. And everyone thought Chubb's knee, because of the gruesome injury that he had against Tennessee, his would have been worse. But Sony did his in high school, so he didn't get the same rehab that Nick got at Georgia. So his knee was actually worse. I know that from when we were going back, but we don't know. I mean, those are the unknowns of this draft process and why these decisions are made. But, DeAndre is a good back. And the whole process I kept pointing to, he comes in as a freshman, and they do have Sony and Nick, and he finds his way onto the field as a slot receiver that year, and, did a lot of things in the pass game, which not only says a lot about his skill set, being a 3-down player, but it also talks about a guy that got up to speed really quickly and mentally picked it up. To me, that was super impressive for a freshman to come in and learn all the pass game concepts right out of high school, which usually takes guys a little bit. So, it was a really good pick by Detroit. So, I think both those guys are good players. I thought Dobbins was a really good player from Ohio State. So, good backs. Pick your poison. They're both good players. It's just if they fit your, how they fit your scheme.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you to do some fortune telling here. And I know you're not on the NFL staff anymore, but I think you're very familiar with Matt Patricia and the offenses that he runs. How do you see DeAndre fitting? Because they've got a pretty good back right now in Kerryon Johnson. Bo Scarborough is also there. I've already heard DeAndre talk about playing in space. What role do you think he goes into? And I know this can change in camp, but if you were forecasting it, what would be your thoughts about what we'll see from DeAndre as a rookie?
I think they're going to – if I were them, I would, again, try to ease him into a role a little bit and not ask him to do everything on all 3 downs, even though he's capable. Leave that to Kerryon and Bo Scarborough and let DeAndre do a lot of that 3rd down stuff right away.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Now, the next Georgia player taken was Solomon Kindley. We all waited for it to be Jake Fromm. It wasn't. It turned out to be Solomon Kindley. And I was kind of surprised by that. I thought Jake would go a little earlier, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But your thoughts on Solomon Kinley, one of 3 offensive linemen that the Dolphins drafted. They're obviously making a concerted effort to rebuild that offensive line.
Yeah, I didn't spend a whole lot of time watching Solomon. Honestly, we I try to circle the wagons once we get done with the Senior Bowl to get ready for the ESPN stuff. But we're really focused on those first couple round guys. I did peek at Solomon, watched 3 games on him, which for a scout that's kind of peaking. But I have a decent enough handle. I was surprised he came out, and I was surprised he went as high as he did. To be honest, I mean, I thought he was a guy that probably should have went back to school. But he gambled on himself and he won because he went higher than most people thought he would.
Yeah, 6'3", 336, Jim. I can tell you he didn't have a good junior year. He had an ankle injury against Notre Dame, missed 3 starts, and really was never the same. Gained some weight, got a little out of shape. And when you're a little out of shape in the SEC, you're a lot out of shape. So his junior film was not good. I thought he looked better as a sophomore. I'm guessing that's one of those upside picks that we talked about a little earlier. Okay, now let's get to it. This is a guy that I know that you've got a lot of respect for. Certainly Georgia fans do too. Jake Fromm goes in the 5th round, 167th overall to the Buffalo Bills. What were your thoughts on Jake falling out of day 2 and into day 3? Or was it never really a fall? Did you kind of have him pegged as maybe a 4th or a 5th round guy?
No, it was a fall for sure. It was one of maybe my biggest surprise of draft weekend. Maybe I'm seeing it differently than other people. I think Jake's a really good prospect. I think that, comparing him to guy, he's getting knocked for his arm strength. And I get it. He's not Justin Herbert. He's not Jordan Love. But he's got a better arm than people give him credit for. I don't know why I haven't done it yet, but I pulled a clip from the Florida game, and he threw an 18-yard out from the opposite hash and put it on a rope right to the sideline. If you can make that throw, you can make any throw that you need to make in the NFL. You really do. If you're throwing with anticipation, you can make every throw. So I just compare him to guys that I've done that reminded me a little bit of him. Case Keenum's won a bunch of games in the league and taken teams to playoffs. Andy Dalton was a guy that had some of the same concerns coming out, similar size guy to Jake, but really good from the neck up. And Andy Dalton's had a heck of a career. They haven't won a playoff game, but they've been in the playoffs a bunch in Cincinnati with Andy Dalton. So I really thought Jake could go in the 2nd round. I thought he was as good from the neck up as anyone in his class. I think that, I watched some tape with him down here. He came into our office at the Senior Bowl. He was training for the, pre-draft process down here in Mobile with his quarterbacks coach, and they came in and we watched tape together. And, that offense wasn't totally in sync this year. There was a whole new group of skill people, as you know, and they weren't all on the same page. And that was unfortunate because, Jake's a guy, he reminds me of Brady in a way when and I say this just in the sense that when I was in New England, if we brought in receivers, they better pick it up fast and get on the same page with Tom Brady or else he was moving on. He wasn't going to look their way. He wasn't going to throw them the ball. And but that was the NFL. In college, you kind of have the guys you have. I mean, can't really do much else. So I could see Jake being frustrated with that situation if guys weren't on the same page with him. And it was obvious on tape that wasn't a real cohesive offense this year. So I think he was a little frustrated by that. But, we were talking about Tua earlier. Jake's a guy that played 40-some straight games. He won, how you said, 37 of them, went to 3 straight SEC titles. And how much different would the narrative be if he wins that national championship as a true freshman? So I just think the quarterback position is about leadership. It's about smarts, football intelligence. And he's got all that stuff. He would have been at the top of this class. I think Jake probably got hurt more than anyone in this draft by what we went through this spring with the pandemic because he wasn't able to spend a ton of time with NFL teams. It's one thing to sit here on a call like we're doing right now. But it's another when a guy walks into a room and spends time and then walks out. And Jake's a guy that when you spend time around him, and I know you have, like he would walk out of most rooms in an NFL setting and everyone would be looking at each other like, wow, that's a dude right there. Like we want this guy as our quarterback. So he probably got hurt by that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that one of Jake's strengths is that charisma and that leadership. And you named it, Jim. It's that it factor. There's a lot of measurables. And certainly the NFL has to pay attention to those things, you as a scout. But when it comes to quarterback, there is something to be said about winning the room, the charisma, and getting the other guys to believe in you. Now, he goes into what I think is a very difficult situation in the sense of I really like Josh Allen. I mean, this guy is big, strong, seems built for the Buffalo weather. And here comes Jake now. I heard Daniel Jeremiah say to help him learn the playbook. What about that? What about Jake's role, and what is his job going to entail now going up there? And what should Georgia fans that want to see Jake become a starter or get a shot one day, what do they have to hope for? Is it just get through the first 2 or 3 years, or is it going to take that Bledsoe-like injury for a door to open? I mean, what is the future for Jake Fromm up in Buffalo?
Well, they're really excited to get him. I was texting with a guy that I used to work with who's up there in Buffalo now right after the pick, and they weren't looking to go quarterback, but when, Jake just kept falling, I mean, he's way too good to pass up there. They're really excited to get him. He's very different from Josh Allen, obviously. Josh has a cannon for an arm, and he's big, and he's athletic, and he runs around. And again, if your hope is to see Jake on the field, it's probably at the detriment of Josh Allen. But I will say this, like, Josh is a really good athlete, and he does a ton with his legs. But he does play a little bit of a reckless style. He does put his body on the line. He's the guy that you'll see him diving for the chains and for the pylons and the guy. So he does put himself in harm's way, which, who knows, maybe that gets Jake on the field. Maybe he'll get that opportunity if, because of an injury situation. But I know they love Josh up there. I mean, they're not looking to replace Josh. But all Jake needs to do is go in and do his thing and prove that he can play at that level. And you've seen it time and time again, guys. You play well in the preseason, and who knows? Maybe the Bills trade him away and flip him. It's like Jacoby Brissett going to the Patriots a few years ago, played well in the preseason for a couple of years. They traded him to the Colts for a third-round pick. I mean, that happens. That's how the Ron Wolf tree works. When Ron was in Green Bay, he was, whether it was Mark Brunell or Aaron Rodgers or Matt Hasselbeck. I mean, every year he was drafting a quarterback, and he flipped all those guys for future picks. So if Jake goes in and does what he needs to do, who knows? Maybe he's in a different uniform in a couple of years.
There were a lot of Georgia free agents this year. I know Charlie Warner went in the 6th round and Tate Crowder went in the 7th round. Rodrigo Blankenship was a guy that you took note of early. He was a Senior Bowl participant. And even though he didn't get drafted, I would make the argument that he landed in a pretty good place. What are your thoughts on Rodrigo, and if there were any of those other Georgia players that impressed you that maybe we should look for?
Yeah, Rodrigo ended in a great spot. So he's sounds like he's going to be the successor to Adam Vinatieri up in Indianapolis. Now he's kicking indoors. Great situation for him. Good situation for the Colts. I mean, they get in a really accomplished college kicker. I was a little surprised he didn't get drafted because we really rely heavily on the NFL teams on our selection of specialists for our game. And back in November, calling around Rodrigo as everyone's kind of consensus number one guy. Well, our other kicker, Tyler Bass from Georgia Southern, he ended up getting picked. He's got a little bit bigger leg than Rodrigo does. Had a really good Senior Bowl week and kicked it well at the combine, so he got picked. But Rodrigo's in a good spot, and he's got the talent to do it. And the thing with kickers, man, they're hard to peg. I mean, all you got to do is like Roberto Aguayo a few years ago out of Florida State, going in the 2nd round and never really making it in the league. So those guys are tough because a lot of what they do is from the neck up as well. Kickers, punters. I mean, those guys are really hard to peg.
Jim, you're a scout. What did you look for when you assess a kicker? You say they're hard to peg, and I get it because so much of what they do is like I got to think it's the ability to handle pressure. But how do you peg a kicker? What's your read? What's the tell?
Well, and the reason I say we rely on the NFL so much is because if you ever talk to a scout and he says he likes watching kickers and punters, he's lying to you. It doesn't matter what grade you give those guys in the fall. I mean, basically all you're doing is trying to identify the guys in your area that are good enough for the special teams coach to look at. In every single team, there is not a specialist drafted that the special teams coach doesn't pick. That's the one position on every team. They're picking their guys. I mean, no GM is going to sit there and say that he knows more about kickers and punters than the special teams coach. So whatever the grades are in the fall, I mean, you hand them off to the special teams coach and they make the decision.
Now, we talked about this year's draft, and Jim, we're talking about Jim Nagy. He's the executive director of the Senior Bowl. He's a former NFL scout with Seattle, Green Bay, New England. I heard you drop Kansas City a minute ago. 18 years, you coach a lot of places and work a lot of places, Jim. And now I love the job you're doing down there. I didn't know how the Senior Bowl could get any bigger and better, but it did. And I saw that for myself a couple years ago. Now, this next year's Senior Bowl, I'm thinking, because I got to sell this trip to my boss. I'm thinking there could be some Georgia guys on this. And when I look at the defense alone, I look at a couple of seniors that jump out. Richard LeCounte is one of them. and middle linebacker is Monty Rice the other. We didn't pre-rehearse, so I hope I'm not missing the mark too much. But who are some Georgia guys that could be on the Senior Bowl radar for next year?
No, Mike, you nailed those two. They're way up there at the top of the board at their position groups. They're way up there. And again, like I haven't had a chance to look at any of those guys yet. Just still focused on last year's class, really trying to shake my head loose of all those names and evaluations before I head out. But LeCounte and Monty are two guys that are way up there. When I was on ESPN the last few weeks, down at my set, so this is my home setup. But down at Senior Bowl headquarters, we had a bookshelf up behind me when I did the NFL Live show and SportsCenter stuff, and we'd put a card from our Senior Bowl board on the shelf behind me, and we put LeCounte up there one of the days. We're kind of rotating that out, but I know our guys that looked at those guys like those players a lot. And going back to last year's draft, like Tate Crowder, that wasn't a surprise at all. He was really starting to play his best football this year. He was kind of right at the cut line for our game at linebacker. I mean, everyone knows he's a converted running back, and I mean, to me, the interesting there, it's about relationships sometime when you get in late rounds. And I know Glenn Schumann, linebackers coach there, worked in New York or worked at Alabama with Joe Judge, the new head coach of the Giants. I'm just curious if a phone call was made there late in the later rounds, if Glenn was stumping for his guy a little bit. But I know he believes in him because I talked to Glenn a bunch. And so he really got Tate playing really good football this year, the best he'd ever played. So that one doesn't surprise me. I think he should compete for a special teams job right out of the gate. And you brought up Charlie Warner. That was a guy we tried to bring up to the Senior Bowl after he had a really good Shrine game. And Charlie said he was banged up and he just didn't want to go 2 games in a row. So I get that. But or maybe it was the NFLPA game, whatever game Charlie went to. I always call around after that week. That game kind of butts up. Those 2 games butt up to Senior Bowl week. But I call around to guys that are at both those games just to see who the standouts were. And a couple guys said Charlie Warner was the best guy at that game, any position. So that was cool. He went, and we liked Wolf a lot. Wolf was a tight end that was really in range to get in the Senior Bowl too. So they had a number of guys, and we liked the receiver too. We liked the refresh my memory, the Miami transfer. Big guy.
Lawrence Cager.
Yeah, Lawrence Cager. Yeah, Cager was on our radar last summer. I posted a bunch of stuff on Cager last summer when we started looking at his tape. So, and he was having a really good year. And him getting hurt, I think that really hurt Jake. That was one guy Jake really trusted. So that hurt that offense when he went down. So, they had some good prospects. And next year, I know I've scanned the board enough. I've seen that Georgia logo up there on the board. So there's plenty of names up there.
Yeah, we did notice that you had Jamie Newman on there. It's hard not to notice. Now, he's a guy coming in from Wake Forest. He's 6'4", 230. The Pro Football Focus people are really high on him. And Jim, what do we make of those football metrics compared to combine Is it just one more analytic? Is it possible to read too much into that? And what are your impressions of Jamie? And I know you haven't watched him closely, but obviously if you've got him on the Senior Bowl board right now, somebody's noticed him.
Yeah, we actually did watch Jamie a little bit in December when we found out he was graduating and he would be eligible for our game. So we watched him a little bit. He's a big athlete, and he can move around and buy time and make some good throws. So I think that, going to Georgia, it'll be really interesting to see how he gels. It's a difficult, what Jamie's going up against right now is difficult. He went to that program. Obviously he didn't see this coming. None of us saw this coming. So now he's having to do this thing virtually like everyone else, and he's not out there with the guys, and he's not building camaraderie. So unfortunately for Jamie, he's facing something he probably didn't think he was going to be facing. But yeah, we like the talent. He definitely was intriguing when we watched. We just threw on a couple games just to kind of familiarize ourselves with him. But yeah, he did some intriguing stuff.
Now, one guy that didn't get picked, and I was curious about him, and maybe you can help me, because I think we discussed him early, was J.R. Reed. And I went to the combine, and his numbers looked okay. But at that safety position, is it just that they just want the most phenomenal athletes there? Or what hurt J.R. Reed? A lot of Georgia fans surprised that a Thorpe finalist was not drafted.
Yeah, J.R. is a good player. He was a really good player for him. He's instinctive. He puts himself in good positions. Obviously a smart guy. He knows that defense really well. I mean, Kirby and those guys are as complex as anyone in college football, and what they ask those guys to to do mentally. But from a physical traits perspective, I mean, you hit it. He's average in the physical stuff. And if you're not drafting a guy to get on the field and start right away, you're really looking at him as a special teams player. So rather than taking a guy that's got average size and average speed, you're kind of looking for a bigger, faster guy that's going to run down and be disruptive. So that's really, when you get into 5th, 6th, 7th round, a lot of those DBs, they're being drafted to be special teams players. So that's probably what hurt JR.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that Lawrence Cager was another guy who hadn't played special teams, and maybe that hurt him. And certainly Lawrence unable to work out with that ankle at the combine, that had to hurt him as well. One guy, my producer, he keeps sending me the notes. Ask him about Eric Stokes. Ask him about Eric Stokes. I don't know if you've seen Eric Stokes yet. I know he wasn't his senior, and I know you haven't looked at a lot of film, but we've seen him projected as a first-rounder. Have you seen enough of Eric Stokes? Do you have some thoughts about that Georgia cornerback?
I have not, but he's another guy that's really high up on the board right now as well. I think we're trying to figure out internally if he's got his diploma. Do you know if he's graduated or not? You got good news for us?
Yeah, that's the question, because now players, it is called the Senior Bowl, but if you're a junior, a redshirt junior, or someone who's graduated, the Senior Bowl will invite you, right, Jim?
Yeah, so if they have their diploma by December, that's right. And it's big. You know, the rule was put in about 5 or 6 years ago by my predecessor, Phil Savage, went to the league office, kind of petitioned for that and got that passed. But we've really tried to take advantage of it. Last year 2019, we had 12 juniors. This year we had 10, including Jordan Love. The year before, Daniel Jones was a redshirt junior. And it's really helped us. The previous high was 4 before I got to the game, and we've really dug in on which juniors are going to get those diplomas, and because we got to reserve a roster spot for them. We can't get to January and to figure out if they're coming out or not. Because our rosters are set by then, so we at least have to have kind of a roster spot saved for them if we think they're good enough, if indeed they do come out. So that's what we'll be spending the offseason doing, calling our people at the schools and figuring out which of these juniors and redshirt juniors are on track to graduate.
We know that football, Jim, kind of evolves. We know it's a cyclical game. Offenses change, defenses change. Do you have any takeaways from this NFL draft? Any direction that you saw the league go in, or any trend that maybe you picked up on this year that surprised you or that was noteworthy? I don't know, Jim, were you able to hear that question?
It was a little choppy.
I was asking about any trends or any direction that you saw the league go in with this particular NFL draft this past year. Anything noteworthy about it?
I mean, the different thing about this draft was the pandemic and what we're under, and the what teams were fighting in terms of getting data on the small school players, non-combine players. I think I want to say in a typical year, someone said that there's like 12 more teams stick to the SEC, Big Ten, bigger school guys. That's really the only trend.
Safe pick. Jim, thank you so much for joining us, giving us your insight, your breakdown on all these players. I know it's been a busy weekend for you, and for you to follow up with us here at Dog Nation and with me here in Athens, Georgia, means a lot to me. I hope we'll be talking a lot in the off season about more of these Georgia football players that could be headed to Mobile next year.
Absolutely, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You got it. Jim Nagy, Senior Bowl executive director, former NFL scout with the Patriots, the Seahawks. He's got 6 Super Bowls. He's got 4 Super Bowl rings. I think he's been a part of 6 different Super Bowls with those organizations. A very accomplished NFL scout, and now doing a fantastic job with the Senior Bowl, the recent Senior Bowl down there in Mobile. And as you can tell, Jim also with a lot of multimedia skills. He can write a little bit. He's a U of M guy who's got a little bit of journalism in his background. Exactly what football needs is a guy like Jim, an ambassador that not only can represent the sport well, but kind of help the fans know the process a little bit better. And we do appreciate him taking the time out here with Dog Nation here today. I want to get to some of your questions. I do appreciate the audience. This is the Ingles on the Beat show. It comes to each Tuesday. Today from my dining room, believe it or not. We've got a little Dog Nation set up behind me, but we're all doing things remote now, trying to adjust to these new times, right? We're trying to get to the new normal. And the good news is the new normal could be coming up this season for football. There's been a lot of question whether or not college football will resume this fall, and we've seen some encouraging signs. I think that SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey had a wonderful analogy last week to a fluorescent light. When we talk about our society getting going again and things getting moving forward, it's like when you turn on the fluorescent light and it flickers a little bit, and then it hums and it warms up from the ends before it beams on. That's what we're starting to see right now, different states opening up. I'm not advocating everybody run out and eat out 3 times a day, but for those who want to do that, the door is open for you to do that. Eventually, we're all going to be filtered back in to the new normal, and the sooner the better as far as college football is concerned. College football, of course, different than the NFL. Very important that the students are back on campus. So it was refreshing for many to hear that Missouri is talking about those students being on campus this fall. Purdue, also another school that's on the cutting edge of getting students back in school. And we've already heard in a conference call between the College Football Playoff Management Committee and Vice President Mike Pence nearly 2 weeks ago now, that the college students need to be on campus before college football can return. Now, recently, the NCAA's College Football Oversight Committee has recommended 6 weeks of preparation. That would be ideal, certainly. So if you're looking for college football to start on time on Labor Day weekend, you would need the players back on campus mid-July. Now, to me, that might seem a bit optimistic. I'm not sure. It's only the end of April. We aren't even in May yet. And as Sankey has reminded us many times, each time he talks, they don't have to make those decisions right now. They're going to wait until they have all the information in front of them to make the best decision that they can. We are getting closer and closer, though, to that date when those decisions have to be made. South Carolina Athletic Director Ray Tanner also recently made some comments as far as maybe not all the leagues would be stable and on the field this year when college football starts. Could it be possible that college football could look a little disjointed? For example, what if the state of California is an outlier and decides that it's not going to have students in the classroom until January? Well, then obviously that would eliminate a lot of those teams, those collegiate programs in California from participating. So could there be a college football season without the likes of a USC and a UCLA, a Cal? You kind of wonder. But these are things, again, decisions, they don't have to be made right now. There are certainly different provisions that everyone is considering. I think that's where we're at right now is you hope for the best, you prepare for the worst. I know Sankey said he's doing his best to stay on task and have college football season start on time, but he's well aware and he's discussing with his athletic directors almost every day different provisions and different possibilities. They always stay in tune with what's happening in each of the states and report that to Greg Sankey as well. If you've got some questions, please feel free to ask them here. I'm taking a look at the messages right now. This is the Ingles on the Beat show. I'll tell you, it's been a tough break for all of us. We've all gone through a lot. I think we're all looking forward to getting to the new normal. Before we get to the new normal, though, there's going to be more struggles ahead. There's going to be more hardships and more challenges. And this is when you sit back and you really appreciate, the doctors, and you certainly appreciate, the scientists for the work that they're doing, trying to, find the cure, trying to get this vaccine, trying to find these antibody tests where we can really study this and wrap our arms around it. You look at the people in your community, right? The emergency transponders, the people that come and are still handling life on a day-to-day basis, certainly are. Everyone that's contributed to this, everyone that's out there still working on the front lines, can't thank them enough. I've been fortunate to sit in the safety of my own home, but that's not the case. Other people have continued to serve and do their jobs, and without them, we couldn't do it. Just going to the Ingles the other day, you take a look at the people that are working in that store. Life goes on for them every single day. They continue to serve, and without them to bring us our products, think how much more difficult our life would be. With that, I'd like to take a moment to maybe, share with you some background on Ingles, share a video to pay a tribute to those Ingles workers that have continued to help us during these difficult times.
It's in our hearts to feel for real. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad, but We stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back with open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand. Community strong.
Yeah, I see a question from Joel Moody, and thank you again. Thank you again to Ingles, and what a great production that video is. Every time I see it, it just, kind of warms my heart, makes me appreciate the work they're doing. Joel Moody asked, how much of an advantage is it for the teams that were able to get more spring? And I think it is an advantage. One of the programs that got an advantage was Clemson. Clemson basically got in all their practices except for their spring game. So, yeah, they're Clemson Tigers, the national championship favorites already, have even more of an advantage that they started earlier. Now, nobody knew that this was coming, and certainly had they known, everybody would have started earlier. But in the SEC, I think South Carolina may have gotten a little bit more time practicing than the other programs. But Alabama, I know they had yet to start. They were on the verge of starting. I think Tennessee might have got a couple practices in as well. What's really going to matter right now, and Eli Wolf told us this 9 days ago. We had him on a Sunday night show, and he said this offseason is going to be the ultimate test for player maturity. The mature teams, the teams that have the guys that take care of their business away from the field. Because right now, these programs can't monitor these athletes. They can't stand over them and tell them to run the wind sprints and tell them to lift the weight and tell them to make sure that they're eating properly and getting the proper nutrition. Georgia players like to talk about being a player-led team. Now they need to be a self-led team. In fact, on DogNation.com, just a couple hours ago, I posted a story about the Superman linebacker, Jermaine Johnson. I'll never forget. We were sitting in the auditorium over at Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall a year ago. Seems like a lifetime ago now. And Kirby Smart was telling us about these Superman plays that Jermaine Johnson was making on the field. The number one ranked junior college prospect who signed with Georgia in 2019. And boy, it may not have seemed like he had big numbers, but he came through in the clutch. When you think about it, that Notre Dame game, when the Irish get the ball back on the Georgia side of the field, and Ian Book rolls out, and it's number 11 chasing him down, making him get rid of the football before he's ready. That's a big play by Jermaine Johnson to come up with a quarterback pressure in a game that Georgia could have lost if Book maybe has a little bit more time. So that was one pivotal play. And then just off the top of my head, I remember the Auburn game, and it's the second quarter, and Auburn has crossed the field. Georgia's up 14-7. It looks like the Tigers are going to get some much-needed momentum in Jordan-Hare Stadium, but no, there's Jermaine Johnson closing on Nix, drills him, ball comes loose, and Richie LeCounte recovers, and it's a shutout at halftime, 14-0. And boy, doesn't that look a lot different than 14-7. So you look at those two moments when Jermaine was in the game, those are difference-maker plays. Those are plays that at the end of the day, there's 4 or 5 of them in every game, and there's only certain players that can produce those plays. I hear so many people talking about X's and O's, and well, maybe Georgia should have put the plays in that LSU had. And listen, Kirby Smart told you, they ran the same routes. Their guys didn't get open. You got to have the guys that make the plays. Jermaine Johnson is a playmaker. Because he went to Independence, Kansas Community College, Last Chance U, this is a guy that knows how to work when the lights aren't on. This is a guy who knows how to operate in the shadows and take care of his business. Because in high school, he didn't. He didn't have the grade. And so when he came out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota, he had to go the junior college route. He had to pay the price. And that ain't Georgia. It ain't easy. The food ain't the same. The showers aren't the same. The bus ride's a lot different. And this kid went through this for 2 years. Now, he played at Georgia last year, so he knows what's expected. He knows the playbook. He knows the system. He understands the expectations. But that dog in him, the one that fought his way through junior college, he's back there in Minnesota right now working out, waiting on his opportunity. I don't think there's another program in the country that can compare with Georgia at outside linebacker. Azeez Ojulari, Nolan Smith, Jermaine Johnson. These are some stone-cold football killers. They're future NFL players. I expect Jermaine Johnson to have a monster season this year. Very excited. And you can see the workout videos of him. If you go to DogNation.com, he posted some workout videos. As I said, that's not a cape on Superman's back. He's got a weight plate in that backpack when he's running up the hills, man. I'm telling you, that video got Scott so excited. He was so excited when he saw that. Sinclair, he even retweeted it. When your strength and conditioning coach is retweeting you, that is a very good sign. Those are the hardest people on the planet to impress, next to the Georgia fans, of course. So what else do we have here? Excuse me. I lost my momentum there. Tim Chevelle wants to know how many offensive linemen. Well, I haven't looked at the recruiting class. I'm guessing they're going to take a lot because you had 3 guys drafted. And then off of this year's team, you got Jamari Salyer. He's a junior tackle who could go pro, and I would expect to go pro if he has a big season at left tackle. You got Justin Schaefer, who I project is the starting left guard. He's a senior. You have Trey Hill. He's the junior center. I don't think he'll go pro, but he might. Ben Cleveland is a senior right guard. So right there between Schaefer and Cleveland, you're losing at least 2 seniors, and you got to think that if you're Kirby, you got to plan on Jamari going. Even if he doesn't, you got to be prepared. So I would guess, and again, purely guess, and intel is the way to go with this, but I would guess 5 or 6 programs. The championship programs that I've covered never leave themselves light on the offensive or the defensive line. Certainly Kirby's had to beef up that D line, and right now he's got some work to do on that line too, because you think about that line. And Jordan Davis is a junior nose tackle, but I'll bet he's going pro. Malik Herring is a senior defensive end, the highest rated guy returning in the SEC on the line per the Pro Football Focus ratings. So there's 2 guys right there. Julian Rochester, a redshirt senior. There's 3 linemen right there. And don't forget Devontae Wyatt. So you're going to be losing at least 4 starters, in my mind, on that defensive line. So this will be a line-heavy class, which doesn't always translate to the best ratings, right? You got to get the quarterbacks and the running backs. You got to get the stars. But this is very much a need class for Georgia. So I expect them to be very thorough and very measured with this. So when I hear people talk about Tennessee passing Georgia in the recruiting rankings, I look at the number of players and say, well, Tennessee has more early commits. If you look at the average rating on these guys, Georgia is still recruiting, in my mind, a level above. Now, we'll wait and see. It's all talk right now. It's all rankings until they sign. As Georgia fans knows, don't mean a thing. Matthew Yushin wants to know, how many sacks do you think Georgia needs as a team? Well, here's the thing about this. You'll remember Kirby talked a lot about chaos, and certainly sacks are part of chaos, but so are quarterback pressures, and so are interceptions, and so are fumbles. So, yes, the sack is the gold standard. It seems to be, but the quarterback pressure is so important because the quarterback pressure can force the interception. It may not go back down as a sack, but as we talked about a minute ago with Jermaine Johnson, that quarterback pressure forced an incompletion on a potential game-winning play. So maybe Jermaine doesn't have the sack, but did he accomplish the job? Yes. And Georgia is not going to get reckless chasing sack numbers. They're not going to open themselves up for big plays. About a month ago, I did a story on Kirby Smart's coaching clinic a year ago and how they talked about playing in that 3-man front against some of these spread teams. You have to understand there's principles involved here. You have to stay in your rush lane because if you rush recklessly, that opens up a running lane for the quarterback. Georgia uses a spy oftentimes. That spy is a safeguard. Instead of bringing that guy on a blitz, you have him sit back and spy. It's one more man in under coverage, and it ensures that the quarterback's not going to break off the big plays. So while people look at the Georgia sack numbers and say, boy, they're not getting it done, I counter with this. In the final 6 games of the regular season last year, Georgia did not give up a play of 40 yards or longer. I want to repeat that stat. In the final 6 games of the regular season, we're talking about Auburn, and we're talking about Texas A&M, and we're talking about Florida. There were no explosive plays of 40 yards or more in the final 6 regular season games. South Carolina had the last one of the regular season, and that was a 46-yard, 47-yard pass when the quarterback bought some time and Devon Wilson lost a step on the South Carolina all-time leading receiver. I believe it was 46 or 47 yards. So the beautiful thing about what Kirby does doesn't seem to get appreciated because it's what we don't talk about, right? It's like the umpire. The best ones you never notice. And to me, the best defenses you never notice, right? Because while there were some sacks and there were some turnovers, we saw Richard LeCounte get really hot. And if you're just joining us, we had Jim Nagy on, the executive director of the Senior Bowl and a former NFL scout. He talked about Richard LeCounte and Monty Rice being high on that Senior Bowl radar. Richard LeCounte was a part of 4 turnovers in the last 4 regular season games. I was worried he'd go pro because Richard was peaking. He would have been drafted, but he chose to stay. The leadership is coming out in Richard LeCounte. I think that him and Monty will be the face of the defense this year, and I expect it to be the best defense in the country. I thought they were the best defense in the country last year. I had an LSU fan on Twitter. I always talk about Twitter. These people get to me more than they should, certainly. LSU fan on Twitter coming after me saying, oh, this defense here that gave up 37 points. Well, yeah, Georgia played from behind. It's a different game if the opening pass goes for a touchdown instead of is dropped. It's a different game with a made field goal instead of a miss. Your defense can't do a lot playing. And, oh, by the way, let's not forget that LSU had a prolific offense. And it's not just Richard LeCounte in the secondary. I know that people talk about Eric Stokes. Eric is a little wiry. He's certainly fast. I think he's been a great cover corner. Tyson Campbell is a bigger, stronger guy that I think has amazing skills and was off to a great start last year. I would be shocked if Tyson Campbell didn't go pro, and I will tell you right now, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a first-round draft pick just because of the measurables. Now, they're going to like Stokes too. He can really fly. But the question on Eric is the size, getting himself built up a little bigger, because in the NFL, they're going to need you in run support. Eric is a guy, though, another potential first-round pick right there with Tyson Campbell, just not quite as big or as long, doesn't possess the same measurables. Richard LeCounte, though, at free safety, the athleticism that he possesses, and you all remember how much Richard beefed up last spring after he got ran over a little bit the year before. Georgia fans let him hear it. Kirby Smart certainly let him hear it. It was a different Richard LeCounte last year in run support. Thought that was very important. Who else do we have here? If you have any questions, now is a good time to ask. As we're coming to the end of today's Ingles on the Beat segment, really appreciate Jim Nagy, Senior Bowl Executive Director, for joining me today. Jim does a great job down there, and to me is a very trustworthy source. I mean, here's a guy with 4 Super Bowl victories in his time with Green Bay and New England, working with Pete. I mean, when you think about the who's who, to me, Pete Carroll is one of the greatest football coaches ever. Certainly Bill Belichick, one of the greatest football coaches ever. And Jim Nagy, a guy that worked on those staffs. So we really appreciated what Jim had to offer today. So want to put a wrap on the show, though. Thank everybody for joining me. If you've got more questions, enter them right here on the message board, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Facebook. I take a look at these questions at the end of every show, and I try and go back and respond to them to make sure that I don't miss everything. It also helps me as I'm looking for stories to write for DogNation.com every day. I want to know, what are the people asking? What do they want to know? A great way to keep up with us is the Dog Nation Forum. And I hope that you already belong to this. But if you don't, you need to find it. You need to go to the Dog Nation page. We've got a lot of insiders. We've got a lot of fans that know a lot of football, and they'll discuss a lot with us in these Dog Nation Forum. Myself, Jeff Santel, Brandon Adams, Connor Riley. We'll all get in there, and it's kind of a chance for us to mix it up in our free time, a little bit more relaxed. Dip our toe in the forum, see what the fans are asking us. So you've got the forum as a resource. You've certainly got this right here on our Facebook Live. I do a Friday night show and a Sunday night show as well. They're a little bit more relaxed every now and then. We get a guest. I'm working on getting Isaac Nada. I know Isaac has some interest in that. We just got to get our schedules matched up. Isaac would be a great guy to talk to about what these guys are going to go through right now as they prepare for the NFL, especially when you take a look at the number of free agents that Georgia has. Now, I'll review this with you. When you look at the NFL draft picks, okay, 2 first-rounders, Andrew Thomas, Isaiah Wilson, first round. DeAndre Swift, second round. Solomon Kinley, 4th round. Jake Fromm, 5th round. Charlie Warner, 6th round. Tate Crowder, 7th round. Georgia almost hit for the cycle if they would have had a 3rd rounder, right? Interesting news today also coming out of Jim Nagy. I did not realize that Charlie was invited to the Senior Bowl after his performance in the NFLPA game. That's good insight. I didn't know that because you thought after Charlie's great performance that he was a guy that maybe could have found his way into the Senior Bowl. Turned out he got banged up in that game. We didn't know that. But the free agent signings, you heard that Jim Nagy bullish on Rodrigo Blankenship becoming the Indianapolis Kickers after signing with the Colts as a free agent. Lawrence Cager, a guy, the injury slowed him down. Senior Bowl liked him. Lawrence is going to have to prove he can play special teams, going to the Jets as a free agent. J.R. Reed, a guy that, Jim said, yes, assignment sound, but the athleticism, a tick below what the teams are looking for. That's going to motivate J.R. Reed. Some other guys that are free agents, Jim mentioned Eli Wolf. They liked him as well. He's with the Baltimore Ravens. And then some other signees. Tyreek McGee goes to the Los Angeles Rams. This is a guy that Kirby had a lot of trust in that secondary. Tyler Clark, the old Warhorse defensive lineman, he signs with Cincinnati. Tyler Simmons, was he on sides? I don't know. Houston signed him. They like his speed, and certainly Tyler is a special teams ace. So I could see that well. Last call waiting on David Marshall and Michael Barnett, trying to find the right situations. Very important for their agents to put them in the right situations to catch on. William Scott Green says, we left 21 points on the board with poorly thrown balls and drop passes, and that the UGA defense played better than Oklahoma or Clemson against LSU. I would agree, William. And you heard Jim talk about how the offense wasn't in sync. That's different than saying they were playing the wrong offense. People need to be clear on that. Georgia did what they can do. This was a program and an offense that was built around the team strength, which was a large, powerful offensive line and a franchise running back. At receiver, you had your top 5 pass catchers from a year ago move on. You were inexperienced there, so you weren't able to lean on the passing game as much. And for all the ability that Jake Fromm has to pre-snap, read, and process, it doesn't matter if your outside receivers aren't on the same page and can't make the same read on the coverage that you do. And that was what was wrong with the Georgia passing game. It's really that simple. But there are national columnists. There are people that want to say, I told you so. I'll say this, and Jeff Sentell made a really good point, because I confessed to him. I said, Jeff, until this pandemic and this break, I never watched QB1. I wish like heck that I would have watched that QB1 series on Netflix. Some great insight into Jake Fromm and also Justin Fields. I would challenge you to watch that QB1 series and draw your own conclusions on the different quarterbacks in that series 1, 2, and 3 season. I found it fascinating to see the cultures that these players came from and the way that they represented themselves back then. Very interesting times, very interesting show. So I want to thank you again for joining me here on the Ingles on the Beat segment. I've enjoyed talking with Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl Executive Director. I always appreciate the production that Michael Carvel brings me out of Atlanta, and certainly appreciate the Dog Nation team. Our pledge to you is we're going to continue to cover the Georgia Bulldogs as best as we can. We've learned a lot about our business, and hopefully you're enjoying our expanded videos. We're doing a little bit more. BA knocks it out of the park every single day. Don't know how he does it. It's amazing the product that he brings, certainly the audience that he has, and how much everyone enjoys him. We all enjoy him just as much. And we hope that you continue to enjoy us, because I think football's getting closer, folks. Keep your ear to the ground, keep your head up, and have a great week. I'll be back Friday night. Thanks for joining me again on Ingles on the Beat.